some are saying that with Mr. Rudd being brought into the picture, that tensions seem to be pretty high between the two countries.
Oh, Mr. Rudd is involved. He's already been involved from before the announcement of the suspension. Senator Joseph Ludwig, the Agriculture Minister, has been to Indonesia and has been working around the clock on this matter with officials, a task force here in Australia, and working obviously with his counterpart in Indonesia. And as the Trade Minister, I've had 3 conversations already with my counterpart, the Trade Minister for Indonesia. So there's a number of people who are engaged in this exercise to achieve the early resumption of live cattle exports to Indonesia. It's not a total ban, it's a suspension.
Dr. Craig Emerson, it's Rishaad Salamat also in Hong Kong with Susan. Just wanted to get your view here at the moment about what you do to make sure that people's concerns are assuaged. What safeguards do you have in place?
We are again working with the Indonesian authorities. I think there's a general understanding that we need to ensure that reasonable animal welfare standards are met, but at the same time that this trade is resumed. It's valuable to both countries, it's valuable to Indonesia, it's valuable to those cattlemen and women, particularly in northern Australia, because we have an advantage in growing the cattle in the northern parts of Australia, exporting them live, and then they go into feedlots into Indonesia, and that actually helps the Indonesian economy as well, and people working in those feedlots. So it's one of those classic cases of the mutual benefits from trade, but we did need to implement a suspension following some very graphic pictures that were released, and we need to have some confidence by working with the authorities in Indonesia that reasonable animal welfare standards will be met.
Minister Emerson, I want to talk to you about these welfare standards because the Agriculture Minister, Mr. Ludwig, actually gave the Indonesian government a draft set of the rules on welfare standards that Australia wants to uphold before, again, reinstituting these cattle exports. And that includes encouraging but not insisting upon the stunning of animals before they are killed. After looking at those graphic images in the video that we saw on May 30th, don't you think there should be an insistence?
No, because the international standards that are widely recognised do not insist upon stunning. And yes, we would encourage it, but in not all abattoirs in Australia, for example, is stunning implemented. In the vast majority it is the case that stunning is implemented, but we're not going to seek to have applied in Indonesia standards that aren't fully observed in Australia. We don't have a situation in Australia where stunning in all situations is compulsory, and so we think it would be unreasonable to impose or seek to apply those standards in Indonesia.
Dr. Emerson, if the same sort of pictures emerged again and we had the same public outcry, and again there was a ban instituted, you perhaps would have to think twice about having another one, having things lifted in such a short time. So is there a contingency plan here?
No, there's a very clear determination to work as a team, that is the Australian and Indonesian authorities, to get the resumption as soon as possible, and that would require, I think, an understanding that we've gained that reasonable animal welfare standards will be met, and that's the task of going through the document that you've described that Agriculture Minister Ludwig has provided to the Indonesian authorities. So it's just to get that assurance, and also, if I could add, to ensure that the Australian cattle that are exported, that there is a tracking system so that it's clear that those Australian cattle are slaughtered in accordance with international standards. These are our friends in Indonesia. The Indonesian government, the Indonesian people are close friends of Australia. That's the approach we're taking. We're working on this collaboratively.
Dr. Emerson, before I move on to other topics, one more question on this controversial ban on cattle, the cattle trade going to Indonesia. It's worth $400 million. When is it going to be reinstituted?
Well, I already corrected your statement earlier that there is a ban. It's a suspension, and I think there is a difference. A ban means that there is no attempt to resume the trade. A suspension means that we have had to institute a temporary halt to the trade and work together with our friends in Indonesia to reopen the trade as soon as possible.
Then. When do you think it might resume?
Yes, and a number of our other ministers, including the Agriculture Minister, have been asked the same question, to put a particular day in a particular week to meet your requirements. And it's, I understand why you're asking the question. It would not be productive for me to say that the trade will resume on a particular day in a particular week. What I can say to you is that the authorities on both countries are working around the clock to achieve a resumption as soon as is possible.
Okay. Dr. Craig Emerson, let's move on to some other topics, because today on the calendar marks the one-year anniversary of Julia Gillard, the Prime Minister, as the head of the nation. Now, you've also been an advisor to Bob Hawke, another Prime Minister, in the past. So what about the unpopularity of Gillard right now? They're saying that it's the least liked government in almost 4 decades.
Well, the reality is that we're pressing ahead with some very important and serious economic reforms, including putting a price on carbon. And you referred correctly to my time working as an economic advisor to Bob Hawke. That was a great reforming government. The Hawke-Keating era was a historic period for economic reform in this country, and there were times when Bob Hawke was seeking to put reforms through and they were unpopular. And Bob Hawke didn't flinch, didn't turn back. He pressed ahead with those reforms. That's what Julia Gillard is doing in terms of putting a price on carbon and lifting the skills base of this country and investing in infrastructure. This is a new reform program, and it's not unusual when you're implementing tough economic reforms that are necessary for the future of the country, that your popularity is affected by that. But what we're doing is we're pressing ahead with those reforms because they're in the long-term interests of this country.
And Minister Emerson, let me talk to you about the personal popularity of Gillard, the lowest in 13 years for any Prime Minister in Australia. You know, with the other Prime Ministers that you've helped advise, Paul Keating, Bob Hawke, do you think this is a difference in terms of character and individual at the top?
No, I don't. And I had a look at some comparisons while we're talking about polls on Bloomberg. I didn't know this was the sort of main issue that Bloomberg was interested in, but since you are, I was looking at polls when John Howard, as Prime Minister, sought to implement a goods and services tax for Australia.
Minister
and when he first
Emerson?
announced that, his popularity took a hammering.